How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
The Manage Smarter Show is brought to you by SalesCred, the app that helps salespeople discover why they miss quota and what to do about it. Find out more at salescred.com. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop, and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
One topic in the 3 years of doing this podcast, Lee, that we really haven't touched on very much is financial management of the business, not your personal, but the business.
Yeah, and it's so important because everything that we do has an impact on the financials, and the financials pretty much is how people get paid and how people, create opportunities for advancement and allows the company to grow and thrive. So unless we're keeping our eye on the financials and the impact that we have on the financials or something like that, it impacts us directly eventually.
So welcome to Manage Smarter Financials. I'm Audrey Strong. Yeah, I'm the Vice President of Communications here at Sales Fuel.
And I'm the CEO of Sales Fuel. I'm C. Lee Smith.
So Jody Grunden is the perfect guest to educate us today on this. Co-founded Summit CPA Group in 2002 and merged with Anders CPAs and Advisors in 2022. Summit, now a division of Anders, the first fully distributed accounting firm. As the leading provider of virtual CFO services in North America, Summit provides professional virtual CFO services for more than 100 companies here in the U.S., helping business owners dive deep into the financial side of their business to maximize profits, minimize taxes. Ooh, we like that. And increase cash flow. So Jody, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. So you have the four most important financial metrics for growing your business. What are they?
Yeah, four metrics, pretty simple. First ones are our cash metrics. Second one's production metrics. Then we have what we call financial metrics. And then the rounding it out is the pipeline metrics. So we've got four that really work together. The cash metric is pretty simple. We tell people that you need to have at least 10% of your annualized revenue in the bank at all times. So for a service-based company, if you're $3 million, the math is pretty simple. We want you to have about $300,000 available for opportunities, for risk, for everything that goes along with it. And if you
would you say that cash flow is even more important than profit?
100%. Well, profit allows you to have cash flow, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Cash flow is the key. You've got to have fluidity with your cash, and that 10% is huge, right? Because when you're making decisions, you don't want to be making them by emotion. You want to take the emotion completely out of the decision making process, and that's what cash allows you to do. Because you could ask two different people. One of our CFOs, you could ask them, hey, should I hire this person? And I could look at that situation and say, yeah, absolutely. Another CFO could look at that situation and say, absolutely not. And really the common denominator is how much cash you have available. Do you have that risk availability? And so that's where cash is I would say the number one. And that's why we always start with the number one metric to make sure that you work on. Our average client has about 15%. So 10% is about 2 months worth of expenses. 30% is about 6 months. So you want somewhere between 2 to 6 months of expenses. And that's why we say cash is the number one.
Let's talk about the other metrics.
Yeah. So the other metrics are going to be really based on your production. So production metrics would be number two. And with production metrics, that's how we develop a forecast. And the forecast is a very extremely important part of any process. And everybody really needs to have one. And what I mean by forecast is it doesn't mean that you work on it in November, December, and then all of a sudden, you put it away and you revisit every once in a while. At the end of the year, you compare to see how well you did. That's not what I consider a forecast. I want our clients to have a dynamic look at their financials all the time. So every single month, our basically what we do is we take all the actuals, blend it up against this forecast, and see what did life do to us. Did life improve things going forward? Now what's our cash position going to look like 6 months from now, 12 months from now, a year from now, 2 years, and so forth? Did it go up? Did it go down? And that's all part of this modeling. And so the metric that we look at are the production metrics based upon what type of organization you are. So if you're a service-based company, you're probably looking at hours, utilization rates, different things that really you can really impact on that forecast. If you're more of maybe a construction company or a repair shop, maybe you're looking for automobiles coming in, dollar amount per automobile, and things that you actually have control over. The important part of this metric or the forecasting side of it is you don't want to just simply stick 10% up there and say, I'm magically going to hit 10%, in revenue or increase revenue over the years. You want to dial it in so that you actually have control over it. So maybe it's, I'm going to have, instead of 20 trucks going through a month in my repair shop, maybe I'm going to try to get 25. Now I can control that. And I've got something that I can actually base my actual financial forecast on. So, I would say metrics are the biggest part. Production metrics are super important to understand what those metrics are for your business.
How did the financial metrics differ from the first thing we talked about?
Yeah, so now the financial metrics, what we're doing there is it's more towards the budgeting side. So what we're doing is we've tied the revenue. We've identified what our revenue is going to be, based on what kind of drivers we have. Now we're going to look and see, hey, what are the expenses that we have in administration and facility and marketing that we have that's going to complement what we just put together there. Because of the bottom line, you want to have at least a 15% margin for really any service-based company. We say that 10% is break even. So if you don't have 10% bottom line, you're doing something wrong. And Lee, like you were talking about earlier, the cash metric is important, but if you don't have 10%, you're not going to grow cash. It's not going to happen. It's going to be so slow. You need it. So that 10% is what we consider that bottom line metric. And so once you've got your revenue, then you kind of break down your administration costs. Facilities usually about 4.5%, somewhere in that ballpark. Marketing could be anywhere between 7 to 11%, depending upon how aggressive you want to get with your marketing, sales and marketing. And then your overall administration should basically fall into it. So you've got your revenue, you've got your direct costs involved into it, which are typically about 50% for a sales organization or a service organization, and then you've got another 35%, which is the combined facility, marketing, and admin costs, dropping it down to that 15%. Now, obviously, you can tweak it to wherever you want to get it to 20%, 25%, but there's got to be a give and take, somewhere in that model there. So the financial metrics kind of sure up that bottom line for you. Then
that's really important then too, because it's like, we got wages are going up because we have to be competitive in maintaining our talent or recruiting new talent. We have inflation going on. And of course, taxes never seem to go down. Even though it's like you've got some tips on how to make that happen. But, those are costs that seem to increase every single year. And if we don't have that margin, we're going to fall behind very quickly.
Oh, and it's important to really dial into that margin every single month. I just had a client meeting just a few minutes ago, and we're talking about, hey, what just happened last month that's really going to impact it? What we had planned last month completely changed. They lost a big client opportunity. And so now we're dialing in and say, okay, so now what's going to happen here? That hire we're going to have in May, we don't need them in May anymore. We need that person maybe in September. So we're pushing things back there, because what we want to do is we want to make sure that no matter what life does to us, we still end up with that 15% bottom line. And the important part is having that control over it on a regular basis, not an after the fact thing. It shouldn't be you get to the end of the year and you ask, well, how did we do for the year? That should never be the case. You should know what it is all the way through. And that's how you really grow a company is really have control over those non-financial indicators and really have a solid forecast.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is agility is super important here when it comes to these metrics.
Yeah, to be able to react. And it happened a lot with the folks that went through the pandemic. There's a lot of folks that really didn't have control over their finances. They get in there and then it's like, oh no, what do we do? Whereas if you had control over, you're looking at it on a regular basis now, way before the pandemic hits. It's just a matter of, okay, so now what do we do? It's a calm situation. You're changing things pretty quickly. You're making those decisions there, but you've got that cash reserve in order to make them and take your time in making them, not doing a knee-jerk reaction. So the agility is super important.
And I'm a sales guy, so pipeline metrics is very near and dear to my heart. Let's talk more about that.
Yeah, so now we've developed this really cool forecast, right? The forecast is based on your capacity, right? The build that your team is built to have. Now with a service-based company, you have to look at the pipeline itself and see and match that up against the forecast in order for you to determine, is that forecast solid? Do we need to make tweaks? because no matter, because if you create this great forecast, but you don't have the pipeline to support it, it's not going to do any good. And so that's where you actually match up the next 3 months. And so we say looking past 3 months with your pipeline is really tough, because it starts getting really fuzzy math at that point. But with those first 3 months, those are the key months there. So what we do is we create that forecast based on capacity. Then we take the pipeline metrics and we say, you know what, we're actually going to exceed that. And so then we increase our forecast. We increase it based over capacity. And now our decision making is, how are we going to support that with our team? Do we have to hire more people? Is it short-term, long-term? Or it could be the opposite, where maybe our forecast or pipeline doesn't substantiate our forecast in the next 3 months, and we've got to do the opposite. Okay, so now what? We have to brace ourselves for maybe not having a great, March or April like we thought we were going to have. Or, how can we improve today to make sure it is a great March or April? Do we have to let somebody go? Do we have to do something different? Do we have to fill in the gap with a opportunity sales that maybe isn't as profitable, but it fills that gap in order for it to really kind of help us out? So that's where the pipeline is so important, to kind of fit in with those four different metrics, going from cash, production, financial, and then wrapping up with the pipeline metrics themselves.
Of the four, which one seems to be the most problematic for most managers?
Problematic, I would say, is probably the cash metric. The cash metric's problematic because a lot of times when a client will come to us, maybe they have 4% of their money in the bank, and not a lot. And you're like, they don't really see the tunnel. It's like, well, I'd love to have 10%. Of course, everybody should have 10%. That's great. But they don't really, they can't get out of their way. They can't see how to get to that thing. And so that's the most problematic until you have that forecast. Because once you have that forecast designed in there, you're building it towards that 10. Now you see the light. Now you see the pathway to get there. And then that kind of erases it. So the cash is initially it, but once the forecast is in play, that kind of goes away.
Let's say you're a sales manager and you're dealing with a CFO that wants to make cuts, and they want to make cuts in the things that you need to make money. So it's making your job more difficult than to generate cash. What advice can you give to a sales manager to be able to have a conversation with a CFO that they'll actually listen to?
Yeah, that's important, because marketing is the key to driving all revenue. And especially when times are bad, the marketing budget should never be cut. It shouldn't. It could be trimmed maybe, but not cut. And that's important concept. So as the marketing manager or the CMO or whatever that title is, I would have a very bold conversation with the CFO explaining the importance of this and how it's going to drive revenue. Maybe not immediately, but it's going to keep things afloat once we get out of this 6-month downturn or whatever that might be. So it's just that you just have to have confidence, and you have to understand that, hey, this is what drives the company's revenue, not just right now, but going forward.
What's that sound like?
What does it sound like? Like when talking to the CFO?
Yeah.
It would have to be, to the point, you'd have to just basically have that conversation. The conversation could be something like, hey, here's what marketing has driven. So in the past, we've always had 11% of our dollars going to marketing, and here's the annualized sales, the sales increases that we've had over the past year, 2 years, whatever. So showing them what marketing's actually driven to really kind of build that, and then reinforcing then that we need to keep the dollars there, or maybe we need to increase dollars in marketing right now in order to really kind of sustain it through this level. Never would I go in approaching and agreeing to do a big, huge cut for marketing, because marketing dollars is key to revenue growth.
So when talking to numbers, people will use numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Use numbers and start with what those numbers have actually achieved in the past. Yep.
And be exceedingly polite.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
They hold the hatchet.
Nice knowing you. No.
Those mean CFOs.
Lee, what did you want to ask about startups?
Yeah, with startups, it's like, there's a little bit of confusion over, terms like TAM, SAM, SOM, but really important then for startups then to actually define what that is going forward, whether you're talking to potential investors or you're just trying to determine, hey, is this a good idea going forward? It's not just for startups of new companies, but I also kind of feel like if you're going to try to launch a new product within your existing company or whatever, these are numbers or metrics that you need to really get a handle on. Can you explain that then for the layman that may have not heard those terms before?
Yeah, that's a kind of tough one to kind of explain throughout. TAM, basically is your total addressable market. And with that, you've got your service addressable market, and then your SOM is your, basically your obtainable market. And so basically each one of them, is a template driving onto the next in order to get that stage. It's a super important one to understand, but it's really a difficult one overall to explain.
I kind of look at it as a funnel. Your TAM, total addressable market. That's what's out there. Total. And then your SAM is basically you're going down the funnel a little bit. Okay, it's like that's the worldwide number, but we only serve North America or something like that. So that drills it down a little further. And then then with the SOM even further, so that you actually are getting more realistic ideas. I think the problem that a lot of people run into, even with the forecasting you mentioned earlier, with the pipeline stuff, is rose-colored glasses.
Yep. Yeah. So like if I were a brand new startup company, and let's say that I was that I wanted to get into the beer industry of some sort,
Okay.
The first thing I'm going to look at is, what kind of market does the beer industry have? Maybe it's craft beer. So craft beer industry in America is X amount of dollars. And so then I'm going to look and say, well, I can't obviously tap into the entire thing. My marketing engine is not designed for nationwide. So then I narrow it down to maybe the Midwest region. And that's where you're narrowing it down and say, you know what? That is reasonable. I can still make a good profit. Maybe, I don't know what the dollar amount would be, but let's say it's a nice dollar amount if I get a certain percentage of that. And then I can even go narrower there and say, you know what, now I'm narrowing that market even closer and say, you know what, this is the SOM, this is the market I can actually penetrate in and actually become a big player in. And you might go through that exercise and find out that if I'm in North Dakota, maybe that's not realistic for me. Maybe it's not a realistic goal, for that market. And so I think that's where you're getting at, Lee. It's important to understand the overall market, what the market contains, in order so you can directly dive into it.
It's interesting. So your website is summitcpa.net. You are in the Summit City of Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Yes.
And is the virtual CFO, obviously that's with remote working and all of that. I assume that your business is growing because it's a more acceptable way of doing business. It seems like since the pandemic, it's improved.
It was hard going at first. It was real hard going.
Yeah.
When we started the virtual CFO back in 2004, nobody knew what it meant. We just kind of named it. It was one of those things that it was just really hard to market. And so, we kept on it over and over and over, really kind of developing it to where it really started picking up in about 2011, 2012 was when we really saw the real big incline to where it became more of an acceptable thing. And if you look at all the CPA firms nowadays, they all have something like virtual CFO or outsourced CFO or something like that on their website, because it is becoming more and more of an acceptable way of doing business. And, with their growth, our growth was about 33% or above from 2010 and going forward. We double our size every 3 years. So that kind of gives you the idea on growth and the acceptability of it. It's pretty amazing.
What I really like about these fractional services is it goes back to cash flow again, because it's like if you go and if you do find somebody that you can hire internally, but then you hit a downflow or something like that, and you need to make cuts, you're kind of like, oh, geez, it's like, this is a big salary that I have here. What do I do with it? Whereas with the fractional approach, something like that allows you then to manage the ebbs and flows of cash and of revenue and a little bit easier. That's why I really like these things.
100%, because you'd spend $250,000 plus for a really good CFO, and for fractional service you're going to spend maybe $90,000-$100,000 depending upon the level of the company, and so it's significantly lower. And for that, a lot of times you get some added services like maybe tax or something like that to add to it to make it even softer. So you're right. We love fractional services for sure. I mean, we're a little biased in that term.
Yeah, just a little. If people are interested in your services, how would you like them to reach out to you?
Feel free to have them just either pop on our website at www.summitcpa.net. We went .net instead of .com because we don't want to spend extra money on it. Or feel free to reach out to me personally and just drop me an email at Jody, Jody @summitcpa.net. I would be happy to schedule just a quick 1 hour meeting with you to answer any questions you might have.
This has been great. Jody, thank you so much for your knowledge and wisdom. Very interesting.
Thanks, Audrey. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.